Pakistan's revenue generation and taxation policies, enhancing collection and compliance. This session brings together academic insight and policy expertise at a time when Pakistan's economic sustainability heavily relies on effective revenue mobilization and social taxation reforms. We are honored to have with us Dr. Mahmood Khalid, a distinguished senior research economist at Macro Policy Lab, PITE, and he's also a project director at the Center of Excellence for CPEC. He previously served as the head of Health Economics Department at PITE. His research interests include public finance, fiscal policy, and health economics. And he is an active member of Pakistan Society for Development Economics. Economist. Dr. Khalid brings with him extensive professional experience from prestigious institutions such as State Bank of Pakistan, PTA, Aga Khan Rural Sport Program, and Punjab Education Department. He has a rich background in teaching and training across various universities and institutions, contributing significantly to enhance academic and professional development of numerous learners. His expertise in public finance, macroeconomic policy, and development economics will help us critically examine the current taxation landscape and explore practical approaches to enhance both collection and compliance. I also have the privilege of being his student during my academic journey in back in 2012 at Qaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, when he taught public economics. Let's now formally begin the session and invite our host, Dr. Mahmood Khalid, to take us forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Vikas, for such a detailed introduction. Normally, when we teach, there are so many students, and we really are proud of you guys because once you're done with your studies, then you spread out all across Pakistan, maybe outside Pakistan, and you still remember us because we sort of, let's say, help you push through by giving you some sort of our own understanding of what the subject of economics is. So thank you once again for such a very nice and long introduction. Second, I
Thank
would
you.
like to thank Dr. Tayyib and Minhaj University for inviting me to discuss this very important subject because this is something which is very crucial in terms of our economic development, the lives of individuals, as well as going forth the sustainability of the governance structure overall. And why is it so important now? Because we are at a crossroad from where we can move to a position where we would be better off, or we would further plunge into more kinds of fiscal risks. And if we really don't think through our strategy, then we would never be able to come out of it. So with that background, I'll not take much, but just let me know that how much do you expect me to talk and how much uh, time would you like to put questions to me to have more clarification on things?
Sir, almost you can speak 1 hour, including question and answer session.
Okay. So what we're expecting is that I'll be talking for, let's say, maybe 45 odd minutes, and then it can be followed by question answer sessions, which you guys deem fit, or maybe from the audience, where we can talk about certain aspects which we have covered in our discussion today.
Yes,
So,
sir.
okay.
Yes.
Let me now go back to the fundamental question, as you have mentioned, that in the classroom, we talk about these subjects from a perspective of what we refer to as the public economics. The idea is very simple, that if the economy needs certain goods and services which the markets cannot produce on their own, then it has to be developed or provided by the government. And for that purpose, they're going to design expenditure program, and in order to finance that expenditure program, they're going to fund it through taxation. So this is basic idea of how the public economics actually works. When we talk about these things in classroom, then we are very sort of idealistic in terms of how the things should move forward, because we think that this is something which is a pure economic resource allocation question. So it would be done in a manner which is most efficient. It does not have some kind of wastages. Its direction is very clear, and it actually helps in terms of improving the overall welfare of individuals. Now, before going to the taxation side, which is actually the theme for today's discussion post-budget as well, I'll quickly just brush through that. Why is it also important to talk about the expenditures? Because as I just mentioned, that the taxes are basically the financial resources for the expenditure side. Just today, I was sort of analyzing the public development sector program efficiency from a perspective of how much private sector credit is actually crowded out and how much growth it brings in. And there a serious question of the efficiency paradox actually comes out, because what we see is that the private investment actually is not just crowded out, but also the level of economic growth which the private sector can bring in, that's missed when the government actually comes into the picture in terms of providing for the public infrastructure. And we don't just stop here. We also have to think about how these services are provided by the government ministries and departments. And there we see that a lot of improvement can be done. Improvement in a sense of setting the key performance indicators, costing them, and then trying to improvise in them, bringing in the efficiency side of it. So I'll stop on the expenditure side here, and now I come back to the taxation. So the principle which we have set at the very outset is that if the governments need to spend, that is going to be financed by the taxes. So now the first question which the tax paying individuals ask is, what do I get in return? That is what we refer to as a tax morality. The first question which every taxpayer would like to ask is that if I'm paying taxes, what will I get return? The second question which they ask is that can I be still enjoying that level of welfare or public spending even if I don't pay taxes? And the third question, which is more fundamental, which we are going to elaborate today more, is that how am I going to pay it? What sort of steps do I need to take? What sort of documentation is going to be required? How much time is it going to take? What is, it's not just about the rate, it's also about how much overhead which I have to manage in all that. So once these questions are answered, then everybody's willing to pay taxes. So we can have a system in which there are voluntary payers of taxes, and then we have to think about those individuals which are actually not willing to pay taxes, what we refer to as the free rider. And for them, we have to develop a kind of a compliance setup in which everybody who needs to pay taxes should be taxed. When we teach taxes in our classrooms, then we talk about the canons of tax, in which the most fundamental one is where we say that there is an ease of collection. That means that we don't have to put much extra efforts in terms of collecting the taxes. The second important principles which we talk about is that it should not create distortions. It should not be something which changes the behavior of individuals. Then we talk about the justice or the equity perspective, where we say that the ability to pay is the right key which should be used for developing a tax policy or tax rate which is going to be collected by the individuals in that particular society. So from that perspective, when we talk about a good taxation system, it should be something which is giving us enough resources to fund our the expenditures. It should be easy for people to pay. It should be justifiable in terms of the distribution in the society. And above all, it should be something which is easy for the payer to pay. That means the ability to pay and the compliance cost. Now, unfortunately, what has happened in Pakistan over time is that only the ease of collection for taxes has been the primary uh, canon which the government has been following, and the rest of the principles are actually set aside, brushed aside. Now, before going to in terms of how the taxation is done at the federal, let me confess that it's basically not just about the uh, individuals who are not educated. Even people which are very much educated, highly educated, they are also fearful in terms of how much they are supposed to pay. Are they overpaying? Are they underpaying? And how to pay? I heard this time that the income tax return form is going to be simplified, but till last year, the average uh, number of columns which the taxpayer for the income tax return every individual has to see was, I think, close to maybe 400 something odd columns. That means 400 to 500 purely legal terms which you have to know in order to pay what you are supposed to pay. Now, given this background, where we see a taxation structure where the system is more based on ease of collection rather than thinking about the distortion, less or lesser distortionary system, or ease of compliance, or tax which is creating justice in the society, we see a tax structure which is kind of predatory, which has converted into something which is um, a kind of a stopper of the economic activity rather than the facilitator. Now, that's very true that whenever somebody has to pay tax, that's actually a charge. That is what the government is about, where the government can actually charge you something without you asking for anything in return. But that does not mean that it should be something which is stopping the people from their doing their own activity. For example, if the businesses wanted to grow and the system is such that it is pulling them down rather than helping them grow, then this is a bad tax. If there is a tax which is forcing the people to go informal, go or think about the cashless transactions rather than switching to a more digital platform or something which is more formal, then this system is actually not helping. And above all these, there is always an element of rent seeking, which one has to be very clear about, that in different kinds of settings, there are always lobbies and there are always vested interests which are influencing the policy. Um, just today, we were talking about vested interest in government's policy making as well, which in case of the federal government for the FBR is basically where the FBR does not want to tax in a manner where their level of efforts or compliance has to be jacked up. Rather, they look for the ease of collection. So it's not just about the vested interest or lobbying on the private sector, which is influencing the rates, but it's also the government side where they are not willing to do what they ought to do. Now, coming back to the basic framework on which the taxation is collected in Pakistan, just to highlight some of the aspects so that we can have a thorough discussion later on as well. We primarily have two types of taxation system. One is referred to as the Inland Revenue Service, and the second one is basically the customs. Now, the IRS or the Inland Revenue Service has two major components. One is direct taxes, indirect taxes. Indirect taxes, primarily it's the income tax. On the indirect taxes side, we have the general sales tax, we have the federal excise duty. In the custom side, primarily it is the, or it should be the tariffs, custom tariffs, but over time we have also started to collect the additional custom duties, the regulatory duties, and the regulatory surcharges as well. So if you talk about the inland revenue system, the income tax to talk about first of all. Now, income tax, as we know, as a student of economics, is charged on our efforts. It is basically charged on our income. So, from a behavioral perspective, the common question comes in our mind that what should be the rate? Because if you're charging me income tax, that means that I'm paying you out of my own efforts, and I cannot take it beyond a certain level. And beyond a certain level, then it has to be something which I would be switching to some kind of an informal system, or I may stop working altogether because that's too costly to work. Because I firmly believe in my net of tax income rather than to think about my total income, which I'm getting as the return for my efforts. It's at the end of the day, the income which I take back to my home. So this is one aspect. So we have to think about that, what kind of taxation structure is there. Now, within that, we have three types of potential taxation bases. One is referred to as the corporate side. The second one is the business individuals. And the third one is the salaried class. And that is something which most of the discussions had been over time, that the taxpayers had been limited to mostly the salaried class in terms of the voluntary payments, and the rest of the two sides are actually not contributing. And that's true. Now, going back again where we started off, that the taxation framework in Pakistan is now concentrated on the ease of collection. So from that perspective, the salaried class are the ones which are most easy to put tax on. So the obvious choice for having a more taxation would be to think about taxing the ones which are going to pay in any case. Now, this actually, why has it happened? Because some almost 2 decades ago, there was a term coined as the withholding taxes. So, in what happens in withholding taxes is that there are certain economic agents which, in the supply chain, are put with an additional responsibility by the FBR or the tax collecting authority, that they have to not just pay their own tax, but they also have to withhold a certain amount of tax on behalf of the FBR. So that is something which has led to reduction in payments by the private business individuals as well as the corporate businesses, because there is a withholding tax regime in which most of the taxes are already being collected. Now, the issue with this is that these are all presumptive basis. If I purchase a mobile card, there is a particular withholding income tax at it. Now, does that withholding income tax actually reflect my income levels? That's not actually true, because poor are also paying the same tax, whereas the rich are also paying the same tax. The same goes for other sorts of withholding bases in which the individuals are actually paying tax without actually knowing that how much income is liable for tax and how much the FBR is collecting. So when we talk about the income tax regime in Pakistan, primarily it is through the withholding taxes. Almost 70% of the taxes are collected through the withholding basis, which actually turns out to be kind of a indirect tax, because when you are withholding the tax without knowing that what is the actual income source or the income level of the individuals, then it becomes a business cost, where the businesses try to forward to the actual end users. And that is something which is very disturbing or damaging to the overall business environment. There is a component of what we refer to as the voluntary payments, and there is a component which is based on the audits. Unfortunately, the voluntary part and the audit-based collections are not increasing by the same rate as the withholding taxes are increasing. And from this is actually the main issue also, where the problem with the nature of taxation actually comes out very elaborately, that what is wrong with the system. You are putting a tax in which you really don't know that what's the actual income tax to be taxed. You are putting a tax when the transaction is not completed. So the businesses finances get stuck. And that's also showing the inability of the government to identify the actual tax base. Rather, they are fishing out of maybe thin air, where the actual base is really not known to the FBR. The second major component of the taxation is the general sales tax, which is primarily a consumption-based tax, and globally it's in the VAT mode. VAT means that it is charged in a manner where every level of value addition gets a tax charge, and accordingly they get some refunds as they move forward. So that actually helps not just in documenting the overall supply chain, but also helps to collect the taxes at the stage of the consumption or the actual transaction, not at the stage of production, which primarily in Pakistan we have right now. So what we have at a general sales tax system, which is a simple single tax, which is collected mostly at the production stage. Now, the problem with that is that it does not identify the supply chain. It is actually put on the ones which are the final producers of the product, and it does not reflect the true liability of that particular producer, because it should be as a VAT, because that is going to be more justifiable, and as well as it is going to document more. Because the problems when we deal with the taxation structure at the final stage is that the persons which are producing are going to claim for input tax adjustments, for which they really don't have any invoice system, and there are problems such as the fake and flying invoices which comes into practice, and the FBR and the system both are at loss because they are not able to pay off their true liability. Rather, there are coercive factors which are taking away the true benefit. And lastly, there is a major tax which we refer to as the customs, which is basically the tax on the international trade, which after the WTO is reducing globally. But in case of Pakistan, that had been one of the major source of collection. Now, the problem with that tax is that it's not just a tax on the borders in terms of the products, but it also carries a kind of overload to them, in which the IRS taxes are also loaded. So something which is collected at the borders, it's not just the customs tariff anymore, but the IRS-based withholding income taxes, the GST, and the FED is also collected. So when we import a particular product, then we are not just paying maybe a tariff duty of 15%, but we also have to pay maybe a withholding income tax of 10%, a GST of 18%, a federal excise duty of so many percent. So what the average value is in terms of collection at the import stage, that comes close to 46%. So if the total tax paid at the custom stage is 100 rupees, so that means 46 is the IRS part or the inland revenue, and the 54% is basically the pure customs tariff. Now, the problem with that is that just think like a producer who is put for the tax chains at the very outset when he or she is actually bringing in the raw material or the input, which is going to be used for further production, or if it is something which is even used for the consumption purposes. So there are so many stages which are going to happen after that. And the tax liability is actually put at the very first stage. That again creates a problem in terms of what should be the fair value, and that actually leads to kind of unfair price setting perspectives as well. For example, just yesterday, there was a circular, what we refer to as the SRO by the FBR in terms of the GST, where they said that the domestic sale price should not be less than 30% of the value which is declared at the import stage. So that means that there is a problem now where the people are actually not giving us the true value of the product at which they are importing. Now, quickly jumping from this perspective to another important perspective of the revenue framework in case of Pakistan is the provincial side. Although this itself is a very big domain and should be discussed in a complete new webinar, but just as my discussion was supposed to be on the overall taxation and revenue framework and compliance issues. So if we don't discuss about the provincial policies and provincial practices, we would not be able to comment about how the federal government is actually put under more pressure for collecting more resources. There is a formula referred to as the National Finance Commission, in which all the taxes which are collected by the FBR are going to be distributed among provinces. First, the federal to the provinces distribution is going to be 57%. Then it's going to be divided between the provinces based on majority is the population and some other criteria. Now, what has happened over time is that since the revenue collection is a difficult thing to do, the provincial governments have left this job to the federal government to do. And that has actually led to the provincial governments not doing those necessary reforms or efforts which should have been there. I'll quickly give the example of this year's budget. If you look through the budget, then the FBR is giving so many new tax measures because they are put to a task in terms of collecting more taxes. But if you look at the provincial budgets, their one-liner major outcome is that there is going to be no new taxes. There is relief for the individuals in the society. So on the federal government side, there is a panic in terms of collecting more and more taxes, whereas on the provincial side, there is peace because they're not willing to collect more taxes or they're not put to collect more taxes. Although the tax bases with them are not small, for example, the property taxation itself is very big subject and has a lot of potential. Then the motor vehicle taxes, agriculture income tax is something which the IMF-led pressure has resulted into some kind of improved legislation. But again, the target for collections are very small, as well as the way it is going to be collected is also not very good in terms of compliance and the value for the collection which is going to be done. So overall, if you look at the provincial side of taxation or the revenue collection measures, they are not doing their job in terms of an economically rational government. It's more of an opportunist way of doing governance because you would not be collecting more taxes because that's bad, but you are willing to spend more. So that actually puts pressure on the federal government or the FBR to collect even more taxes because that has to be distributed to the provinces which are going to spend these money when it is transferred to them. At the federal level, there is only one major entity which is collecting the taxes, but at the provincial level, there are three departments. We have a Board of Revenue, we have a Federal Excise and Taxation of, not Federal, Provincial Excise and Taxation Office, and then we have the provincial revenue authorities as well operating. So just imagine that it's a small province in which the revenue is collected from the same basis, but they need three different setups to collect taxes. And each one of them is not doing that job also to the mark which should have been there. So now quickly shifting to the current federal budget, because given this scenario, what has happened over time is that the FBR has been put to a task. But let me give you a breaking news that the FBR has really done it and they have stood the pressure and they have delivered. The tax to GDP ratio has actually risen maybe close to 20% of the GDP. This is a breaking news because nobody is going to tell you about it, although this is something which is available in data. There is a report which is published by the FBR in detail, but the economic survey gives it as one chapter. That's called the tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are basically the values of taxes which were due but are exempted by the government. For example, I'm also one of the beneficiaries of that system. When my income tax is calculated, then 25% of my total tax liability is reduced because I belong to a researcher community or research office. Although this is now being waived off, it is no more available after the 30th June. So this was the last year. So I can now proudly say that I'm not one of the beneficiaries after the 30th June, but till date, I was a beneficiary. So that's a tax which was possibly collected. It could have been collected, but it was not collected by the government because they wanted this to be exempt. And similarly, there are so many other exemptions which are given. I'm not going to go into detail that whether these exemptions are good or bad. I'm just making a statement that that tax was almost there to be collected, but it was exempt by an SRO or by a government's policy. So the report of fiscal year 23-24, we are right now in fiscal year 24-25, which is going to close at 30th June. But for the last year, outgoing fiscal year, the total worth of the tax expenditures was close to 5.8 trillion rupees. And the total tax which was collected in 23-24 by the federal government was close to 9 trillion or something. So it turns out to be almost 62% of the total tax collected. So that means that we, on our own will, have not collected a potential tax of close to 62%. So if I add that back, and my earlier tax collection was 11% of the GDP, so that means that if there is a 62%, which was there, which should have been collected, but nobody's willing to do that on the part of the government. So that means that my total tax payment as a percentage of GDP is going to be close to 17-18% of the GDP. So I was very proud to see that, because the IMF asked us that we should take our tax to GDP ratio to 15% of the GDP, because that is something which is required for fiscal sustainability. I happily announce that actually the FBR's tax to GDP ratio is close to 17%, but out of that, almost 6%, 7% has been let go by the federal government on their own will for some purpose, which we really don't understand that what kind of economic gains does it have. At the same time, when we, as I mentioned earlier, that since the provinces are basically not doing their job, so they actually push the federal government or the FBR to do more and more taxes, which practically is not possible, because if you are not helping or adding the governance layers at the lower level, then the performance by the federal government is practically not that good. This is something which we all know from the public policy perspective, that the decentralized setups are always better as compared to a centralized one. But since the decentralized taxes which the provinces are supposed to collect are not that much efficient, or the government is not willing to do that at the province level, so all the pressure is now on the federal government or the FBR. So what does it mean for the FBR? As I just mentioned, that 7% of the GDP, the government, not the FBR, has left for not collection, something which could have been collected. So from where the additional resources are going to come? So for that, the FBR actually goes into frenzy. They are going to now think about all possible transactions where they can put certain taxes to collect additional resources, without thinking that what kind of an economic friction or distortion it's going to create, and what were the alternatives which could have been there. For example, if you see the latest budget in terms of what the federal government is supposed to collect. Now, the problem again is that if you go into detail of what the taxation measures are taken up by the federal government, again, it does not reflect the kind of economics which we think should have been there. For example, thinking about dividend tax for companies. I'll just read it for you. The tax rate on dividends received by the companies from mutual funds driving incomes from profit on debt has been increased from 25 to 29%. So that means the companies are going to be discouraged in terms of investing in mutual funds, or the individuals which at the back of these mutual funds are also investing would not be willing to invest. So that's a kind of a regressive tax from a perspective of economic growth. Withholding taxes on the government securities has been increased from 15 to 20%. Now, again, who's saving in those government securities? The banks are making money, but it's going to be the individuals at the end of the day which are investing through the banks, because the text says that excluding individuals. But the problem is that the individuals does not invest in government securities directly. It's always through the banks in which through they are going to put their money in. Then there is a tax on digital transactions proceed levy, a new tax of 2% of the gross value of the supplies proposed by for the person supplying digitally ordered goods. So that means that if somebody is doing the digital services, then they have to collect 2% tax on the behalf of the ones which are actually taking those services from them, and 5% digital presence proceeds tax on the foreign vendors. Similarly, the cash withdrawal on withholding basis for the non-filers has been increased from 0.6 to 1%. Now, without understanding that why these non-filers are there in the system, we are charging more and more taxes, because that actually at the end of the day is not helping them to improve. But as we just mentioned earlier, that the canon of ease of collection, someone who's already in your net is going to be put with more charges. And the system which could have been improved, for example, the point of sales, which should have been vigorously implemented or talked about, because that is going to reflect the true value of the consumption sales, or maybe the track and trace system, which should have been working efficiently in terms of identifying number of potential sources, or even thinking about the other systems which could have facilitated the system. For example, having electronic refund system for the businesses, rather than giving them the burden of going to the collector for refunds, which actually gets stuck and doesn't get paid off till the new tax liability comes in. So that sort of structure is there. So what we see at the end of the day is that the taxation measures which are taken by this budget also is not reflective of the improvement in the overall system. There is a little tweak there and here. The profit on debt has been increased from 15% to 20%. So that means the individuals which were earning income from investing in government bonds, or sort of lending into different entities through their banks, would be put under the taxes. Similarly, there is a relief which is provided to the salaried individuals in terms of up to the 3.2 million level of the individuals, but without thinking that the tax bracket actually starting at 0.6 million, which is 600,000, which is 50,000 per month. So if you think about individuals earning 50,000, they are also liable to pay tax, even if it is very small. They are also liable to file their returns, because by law, those which are in the income tax slabs are also liable to submit their income tax returns. That's not possible. We did a small analysis when we compared the income tax starting slabs of the region, the Sri Lanka, the Bangladesh and Indian case. Then their starting tax slabs were very high, almost 3 or 4 times higher. So equivalent level, the Pakistani income tax starting slab should have been close to 1.2 million, not 0.6. It should have been doubled. So the second slab should be totally omitted. And that's also for the salaried class. For the business individual, this is not happening. Then there are fixations, which are again something which reflects the problem with the compliance. This is one of the topics which we are also talking about today. The commercial properties annual rental value, they have been fixed at flat 4% of the fair market value. From where would the fair market value come from? That's going to be set by the FBR. And irrespective of what should have been the fair value in the true sense, they are going to be liable to pay taxes. So that again reflects that they are unable to know that what's the true rental income, and it is going to be a kind of a fixed value which they have to consider for. There are good things as well. For example, the custom duties has been improved this time, in which instead of having a higher customs duty, they have fixed it to 3 slabs, 5, 10% and 15%. And they have also committed that they are going to be gradually reduced. The burden of duties such as the additional custom duties, the regulatory duties, which works like customs, are also committed that they are going to be reduced. And that is something which is really going to help the economy to grow, to propel, because if you are having a higher level of international trade, that actually leads to more economic growth or development. Again, going to the provincial side, as I mentioned earlier, there is practically no tax. Whatever is there, it's very small in nature. It does not have that much significant contribution in terms of what they're going to be delivering in terms of their total collection. So I stop here, and I would really love to go forward in terms of having more discussion so that our points are more clear. There
Thank
is a
you very
question.
much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, for your brief discussion on expenditure and revenue side of federal budget. So, is there any question from the audience? Please, you can raise your hand, or you can also mention the question in the question and answer box.
There is already a question in the question and answer
Yes,
box
yes,
that
yes.
you can read
So,
that.
question here. It is really surprising, but it is really needed to analyze the cost of achieving the target of tax to GDP ratio, जो कि बड़ा surprisingly आपने बताया है कि more than 20% जो है उसको भी यानी कि ना इस दफा क्रॉस करके, और डेफिनेटली नेक्स्ट टाइम इनका टारगेट है कि और ज्यादा इंक्रीज होगा। तो इसका जो वेलफेयर इम्पैक्ट है वो कि एनकरेजिंग नहीं है, तो इसके क्या कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज होंगे?
This is something which is very important to understand. In terms of the optimal taxation, we talk about particular phenomena which we refer to as the tax Laffer curves. If you are increasing the tax rate, that does not mean that you are going to linearly get the similar level of higher tax value. At certain point in time, it is going to start to reduce. Now, this is something which is very important in case of Pakistan, because what we have seen is that unfortunately our tax spinners have been very small. We did a small analysis in terms of the withholding lines, and it turned out that out of almost 90 withholding lines, close to 55 were giving very small amounts, maybe total worth of 10 billion rupees. But they were there because they are easy to collect, and the FBR was not willing to let go of them. Similarly, in the general sales tax side, out of almost 800 products, 700 products were giving very small amount of the revenue collection. So what happens is that when you are charging tax, which is not the optimal level, that leads to behavioral response of businesses not improving in terms of their production levels or expanding, or even going informal. And as we mentioned earlier, that leads to crises such as the fake and flying invoices and problems at the import stage in terms of misinvoicing. All these creep into the system because there is a pressure on the businesses to pay off, which they really can't manage in terms of their businesses. So either they should close, or they should remain small, or they are going to go to informal sector. So this is something which we have to understand while thinking about the overall tax to GDP ratios.
Sir, there is another question which is related to what about the tax return policy? I think she is mentioning related to filer
Returns.
and नॉन फाइलर। मुझे लगता है
Hmm.
ये इससे रेलिवेंट ही बात कर रहे हैं।
अब ये देखिए ना, फाइलर नॉन फाइलर की जो कैटेगरी है, दैट itself is a sign that the FBR knows that they can't implement the system, so they have allowed the system to work on a non-filer basis. So instead of stopping the transaction, they should think about improving the way the taxes are collected. Too much focus is on filing the returns. If you look at the data, and that's also one of the problem, the FBR, they don't publish the latest data. The data which was of 2018 in the income tax directory which they published, the average tax per person has fallen at for the filers, as well as almost 50% of the filers were zero income filers. So even if you make the people return their files, they file the returns, it's not going to help the revenue collection because the FBR is unable to detect the true levels of the income. The problem with the system is that we have got an internal intelligence and audit unit of FBR, which really needs to improve. They have to think about how they can create more demand on the basis from where the revenues are going to be collected for the ones which are not paying. So from that perspective, we really believe that the filer non-filer distinction doesn't really help. The issue is that the taxation policy needs to improve, the rates has to reduce. There should be ease of compliance, and that is automatically going to help the people to get registered to the system and to pay taxes, not the way which the FBR is trying to do.
जी सर, मेरा खुद का एक क्वेश्चन है वो ये कि एक साइड पे हम बहुत ज्यादा डिस्कशन कर रहे होते हैं फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन की। पाकिस्तान में ऑलमोस्ट 25% लोगों के पास बैंक अकाउंट है, 75% के पास है ही नहीं है। एक साइड पे हम कह रहे हैं कि लोगों की ट्रांजैक्शंस फॉर्मल हो, उनको यानी कि ना फाइनेंशियली इंक्लूड किया जाए। और दूसरी साइड पे अगर हम देखें तो हम उनकी जो ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं उसके ऊपर टैक्स लगाए जा रहे हैं। अगर वो 1 लाख रुपए विड्रॉ करते हैं तो उसके ऊपर पहले 600 रुपया था, कल में 0.6%, अब ऑलमोस्ट 1% कर
1%.
दिया, 1000। ठीक है, तो क्या ये एक साइड से टैक्स कलेक्शन कर रहे हैं, दूसरी साइड पे डिस्करेज कर रहे हैं फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन को? इसके क्या कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज हो सकते हैं?
बिल्कुल आपने सही आइडेंटिफाई किया. इट्स नॉट जस्ट अबाउट द बैंकिंग सेक्टर. The other source of digital economy inclusion that's also heavily taxed. जैसे मिसाल के तौर पर अभी हमारे जो घरों में ई कॉमर्स के थ्रू छोटे छोटे पैकेजेस आते हैं, पुटिंग टैक्स ऑन देम इज नॉट बैड, बट द वे इट इज गोइंग टू बी कलेक्टेड. वो कहते हैं कि जी जो कोरियर सर्विस है बेसिकली ये हमारे बिहाफ पे they are going to collect the income taxes, they are going to collect the GST and so many other things. So that actually creates a friction, and that is going to create an informal economy as well, because they would not like to be more formal. So instead of putting the tax where it is due, the principle has been कि जहाँ पे आसानी हो वहाँ पे टैक्स लगाना है, without thinking कि what kind of a distortion it is creating. टैक्सेशन के केस में हमेशा कोशिश ही की जाती है कि जहाँ पे कम से कम डिस्टॉर्शन हो वहां पे टैक्स लगाया जाए, और ऐसा टैक्स हो कि जो फाइनल लाइबिलिटी के तौर पे हो, यानी कि पास ऑन ना किया जा सके, उसकी वजह से कोई डिस्टॉर्शन ना हो. बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली इन आवर केस, स्पेशली डिजिटल जहाँ पे इकोनॉमी की बात आती है, दिस टाइम द गवर्नमेंट हैज रिकग्नाइज दैट दिस इज समथिंग विच दे हैव लेफ्ट अनफॉर्चुनेटली फ्रॉम पुटिंग अगेन थ्रू द विदहोल्डिंग टैक्सेस रिजीम. तो वो इसके ऊपर बहुत हैवीली जो है वो फोकस कर रहे हैं. On the non-filer case of 1%, again, this is something which is not going to help, because it's only going to lead to cash-based economies. और दूसरी साइड पे आप वाली बात है कि the government is trying to have more digitally platform-based economies, जहाँ पे हम कहते हैं जी QR कोड के थ्रू हम तमाम जो हमारी शॉप्स हैं वहाँ पे पेमेंट्स किया करेंगे, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. And if the tax structure is such that the people are not willing to come on board, then this is not going to help. They should really think through about how these policies are being made.
अच्छा सर, इसमें एक और क्वेश्चन है, वो ये है कि आज से 2 से 3 साल पहले हम बहुत ज्यादा सुनते थे कि जी स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान इंडिपेंडेंट होने जा रहा है, उसकी इंडिपेंडेंस का हमारी फिजिकल साइड पे बड़ा इम्पैक्ट पड़ेगा, लाइक रेमिट उसके रेवेन्यू साइड पे, उसके एक्सपेंडिचर साइड पे। तो क्या उसके इंडिपेंडेंस का कोई जो पोस्ट इम्पैक्ट आया है वो फेवरेबल है, फेवरेबल नहीं है, या कंज्यूमर ओरिएंटेड है, वेलफेयर के ऊपर उसका क्या इम्पैक्ट पड़ा, क्या उसने डिस्टॉर्शन किया?
बैंकिंग जो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी या सेंट्रल बैंक के इंडिपेंडेंस का डायरेक्टली हमारे टैक्स साइड से तो इतना नहीं लिंक है, लेकिन जो उसकी वर्किंग है वहाँ से इनडायरेक्ट चैनल्स डेफिनेटली डेवलप होते हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल हमारी जो डिस्काउंट रेट्स हैं बेसिकली उनकी जो सेटिंग है, और उसी के अंदर हमारे पास एक कॉन्सेप्ट आ जाता है जिसको हम कहते हैं सिनुराज रेवेन्यू. सिनुराज रेवेन्यू का कॉन्सेप्ट ये होता है कि वेयर दी इन्फ्लेशन बेस्ड कलेक्शन इज डन बाय द गवर्नमेंट, यानी कि जो ट्रू सेंस में जिसको हम कहते हैं हमारी जो कलेक्शन है, दिस इज नॉट जस्ट द रेवेन्यू ऑफ टैक्सेशन बट ऑल्सो सेंट्रल बैंक्स की नॉन इंडिपेंडेंस के थ्रू जो इन्फ्लेशन क्रिएट होती है उसकी वजह से जो डेट की रियल वैल्यू एरोड होती है वो भी हमारा एक किस्म का रेवेन्यू होता है. तो वो बहुत ज्यादा हमारे पास पहले एक लिवरेज के तौर पे होता था, इनमें चार actual debt liability was going down because the inflation was very high. तो वो over time it has been reduced. Now the central bank's independence has ensured that the Sirunaj revenues are least. They are trying to fix the inflation, and especially that inflation which is generated because of the higher borrowing from the central bank or increased in the money supply. तो वो काफी हद तक हमारी अब कंट्रोल्ड है. बट गोइंग फोर्थ हाउ मच इट इज गोइंग टू लास्ट, बिकॉज जिस तरह अभी हमारे जो 2 लास्ट एपिसोड गुजरे हैं ऑफ हायर इन्फ्लेशन, तो वहाँ पे हमारे पास टोटली डिफरेंट जो सा है वो रिजल्ट्स आए थे. जैसे हमारी जो 2 साल की पिछली ग्रोथ है, दैट हैड बीन फिनोमिनल इन टर्म्स ऑफ टैक्स रेवेन्यू कलेक्शन. हम मतलब है कि 5 ट्रिलियन से देन वी वेंट टू 9, फिर 12 ट्रिलियन के ऊपर चले गए, और इस साल का हमारा जो टैक्स टारगेट है दैट्स क्लोज टू 14 ट्रिलियन. तो अगर हम दोबारा से उस हायर इन्फ्लेशन की बेसिस के ऊपर ये दोबारा से टैक्स कलेक्ट करेंगे, तो दैट इज समथिंग विच इज गोइंग टू बी डैमेजिंग. बट लेट्स सी हाउ डज द सेंट्रल बैंक plays down in terms of the policies for future.
सर आपके इसी आर्ग्यूमेंट में क्वेश्चन है, जैसे कि अभी आपने कहा कि 14 ट्रिलियन जो है वो अगले साल का है, उन्होंने 14.2 ट्रिलियन टारगेट रखा है, ऑलमोस्ट 2 ट्रिलियन का इजाफा करें 20% के राउंड अबाउट, जबकि ग्रोथ टारगेट इनका 4% है। तो क्या पॉसिबल है 4% ग्रोथ टारगेट के साथ 20% और टैक्स रेवेन्यू को इंक्रीज करना, गिवन डेट के फिस्कल रिस्क की ऑलरेडी सिचुएशन है?
इसमें जैसे मैंने आपसे कहा ना कि इन्फ्लेशन बहुत बड़ा रोल प्ले करता है. सो व्हाट दे हैव फोरकास्टेड कि हमारी को इन्फ्लेशन भी तकरीबन कोई 7-8% के करीब होगी, और ये हमारी रियल ग्रोथ है. तो 7% इन्फ्लेशन और तकरीबन कोई 4-4.5% ग्रोथ, तो ये हमारा बन जाता है कोई 11-11.5% बन जाता है. जो बाकी 6% है, वो ये अज्यूम कर रहे हैं कि जो एफबीआर ने नए टैक्स मेयर्स लगाए हैं, कोई तकरीबन को 336 अरब रुपए की उनकी कैलकुलेशन है, दैट्स गोइंग टू डिलीवर. बट हाउ फार इट इज गोइंग टू बी ट्रू, बिकॉज जिस तरीके से उन्होंने टैक्सेस को स्पेल आउट किया है, what we're expecting is that there is going to be backlash. The businesses are not going to accept such higher levels of taxes on their existing structures. What they were looking forward was कि किसी तरीके से सिस्टम के अंदर आसानी आए, और स्पेशली जो सेक्टर्स टैक्स नहीं कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहे, जिस तरह आपका रिटेल सेक्टर है फेडरल लेवल के ऊपर, फिर उसके बाद प्रोविंशियल लेवल के ऊपर इनकम टैक्स, सॉरी एग्रीकल्चर इनकम टैक्स है, या अर्बन इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी टैक्स है, that is something which was missing from the policy altogether. So we are hopeful that given the past performance, the FBR at the end of the day is able to collect such levels of resources. लेकिन क्योंकि इस बार customs का भी उन्होंने काफ़ी जो सा है वो proposal दिए हैं to reduce the customs tariffs, so it's going to be very tough. और प्रॉब्लम ये आता है कि जब भी आपका टैक्स टारगेट टफ हो, तो वी आर एक्सपेक्टिंग मिनी बजट्स, एंड द मिनी बजट्स आर वेरी क्रिटिकल फॉर दी बिजनेसेस, क्योंकि ये अनसर्टेनिटी को जाहिर करते हैं. मैं अगर एक बिजनेसमैन हूँ, मैंने अपनी फिजिबिलिटी बनाई है 15% इनकम टैक्स के ऊपर, और डाउन द रोड अगर गवर्नमेंट उसको बढ़ा के विद इन 6 मंथ्स 16% कर देगी, 17% कर देगी, तो दैट्स गोइंग टू पुट मी इन ट्रबल. तो लेट्स सी, इट्स अ वेरी slippery slope on the basis of which the government budget has been set this time.
थैंक यू सर। बस एक और क्वेश्चन है।
जी.
वो ये कि सर हम शुरू से, जब से इकोनॉमिक्स के स्टूडेंट है, तब से सुनते आ रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में रिग्रेसिव टैक्सेशन पॉलिसी है। अमीर और गरीब सेम टैक्स पे कर रहा है। एक दूध का पैकेट जब वो परचेज करता है, अब इस बजट में जो डार्क साइड है बजट की, उसमें डेफिनेटली ये जो पेट्रोलियम लेवी को 100 रुपीज तक लेके जा रहे हैं 60 से, और इसी तरह से कार्बन टैक्स 2 रुपये पर लीटर ऐड करने पड़ेंगे, जो कि इक्वली अमीर और गरीब दोनों को इम्पेक्ट करेगा। ठीक है, तो ये रिग्रेसिव टैक्सेशन क्या पाकिस्तान से कभी जान भी छूट पाएगी, कि ये पूरी जिंदगी जब तक है सांस तब तक ये चलता रहेगा?
नहीं, बिल्कुल इम्प्रूव किया जा सकता है. अगर हमने लास्ट ईयर एक पूरा टैक्स कमीशन किया था, जिसमें हमने एक रिपोर्ट पब्लिश की थी ऑन ऑन ईच टैक्स, कि किस तरीके से हम इसको आसान बना सकते हैं, इसमें हम ज़्यादा रेवेन्यू कलेक्शन का पोटेंशियल लेके आ सकते हैं, और कैसे हम ये बिजनेस फ्रेंडली बना सकते हैं. और ऑनेस्टली हमने जो कैलकुलेशंस की थी, तो उसमें वी एंडेड अप इन टर्म्स ऑफ हैविंग मोर रेवेन्यू रादर देन लेस रेवेन्यू. So the problem only is that the FBR or the government is too much worried to take these decisions, bold decisions. क्योंकि IMF के प्रोग्राम के तहत the government is always fearful कि if they do something which is going to theoretically speaking, improve the business circumstances, which they really don't believe, then they are going to lose resources at the end of the day. So we should be hopeful as a researcher, as a academic community, we should always be working. And the good thing this time is कि इस बार का जो फाइनेंस बिल है उसमें एक उन्होंने टर्म ऐड किया है कि जो डेटा है एफबीआर का वो अवेलेबल होगा पब्लिकली, पब्लिक से मीन एकेडमिक्स को, for analysis. If that opportunity is given to the domestic academicians and researchers, hopefully there are going to be evidences which are going to be generated and the tax policy is gradually going to improve. But for the time being, it's more of an arithmetic nature-based policies in which the behavioral assumptions or understanding is not incorporated. So at the end of the day, we have a system in which they are increasing the tax on those which are already in the tax net, and the net is actually not increasing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Jazakallah khair. Is there any
Awesome.
question from audience side?
चले मेरे ख्याल में
I think
काफी
audience side से कोई नहीं है और रह गया है, ठीक
चले
है सर। जज़ाकल्लाह खैर, आपकी माशाल्लाह बड़ी थॉटफुल इनसाइट्स आपने प्रोवाइड किए,
बहुत शुक्रिया।
टैक्सेशन से रेलिवेंट, पब्लिक पॉलिसी से रेलिवेंट, पब्लिक इकोनॉमिक से रेलिवेंट। सर थैंक यू, जज़ाकल्लाह खैर सर, थैंक यू।
थैंक यू वेरी मच। अल्लाह हाफिज। अल्लाह हाफिज।